Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. I hope your spirits are high in this time of social distancing and during the time of lockdown. So, let us start with today's discussion. So, the topic I am going to deliver a lecture, more than a lecture, let's say, I'll be sharing my views on a topic. And the topic today that I have chosen is need for an alternative approaches need for an alternative indic approaches. So, what does that mean? We will talk about that. But before we really start discussing today's uh, issue and today's topic, let us pay our tributes to the great social reformer of India, Mahatma Jyotiba Phule. Today is his 193rd birth anniversary, and let us take this opportunity, let us take a pause and pay our tributes to all those social reformers, not just of 19th and 20th century India, but also the great legacy of social reformers, whether it is in the form of different bhakti traditions all across the country, whether it is through Kabir or whether it is through Dnyaneshwar and Tukaram, whether it is through Namdev or whether it is through the Sikh gurus. So let us take this opportunity to pay our respect, to pay our tributes to all these social reformers because of whom we are today what we are. So let's take a pause and do that. So let's come back to our discussion today. What is it that constitutes Indic approach? Do we need an alternative approach? Alternative approach to what? So let me just highlight a few important points here at the beginning. So this video starts with the conviction that we need an alternative approach to look at the way we are dealing with our social issues, our political issues, our economic concerns, our policy issues, our mental health, our physical health, our medicine. So almost every approach that our lives are affected by, we need to think of an alternative approach. So when I talk about alternative approach, do I necessarily mean that we need to discard everything that we have? The obvious answer to this question is no. But what we sufficiently know is the kind of paradigm we are working in. It is not foolproof paradigm, or it is not providing us sufficient leeway to work out our solutions, to work out the solutions to the existing problems. So this is the idea, this is the understanding wherein we need to think about some alternative approach, and especially the calamities or disruptive forces that we are seeing at the moment, like corona, and the entire world is suffering because of this small, even not seeable, in a way invisible being, in invisible virus, that it is causing havoc to the human understanding, to human rationality. So none of us really could predict this, none of us saw this coming forth, and none of us were prepared. So with all the scientific development, with all this advancement that the human species has done, we have fallen short of understanding this. So what is an alternative? So we are in the position that we are right now, but is there some possibility, some alternative to make our lives much better than they are right now? And can we adopt alternative approaches to deal with these day-to-day issues? So this is the background through which I have chosen this topic. Let us now ask ourselves some basic questions. So I'm sure many of you are students, you are studying in the universities, some of you are doing mbas, law, so people engineering, so people from diverse background, they are joining now. So the very fundamental question I want to ask, when we are talking about indic traditions and indic approaches, how many of us really know about six schools of Indian darshanas or Bharatiya darshanas, or these are roughly translated as six Indian schools of philosophy? Have you learned about this? Has anyone taught us in the school? Or let us say, how many of us are trained in Sanskrit and can read and write and speak Sanskrit? and can make sense of our old scriptures? Okay, let's forget Sanskrit. How many of us are even trained in, say, vernacular languages? Can we speak, write, read, and converse easily in our mother tongues? Especially the millennials, because the English education has been the key in recent past. So how many of us are really into the vernacular literature? How many of us can make sense of it? Okay, fine. So many of you might be law students and you must be doing jurisprudence course. I teach at a national law university, so definitely each law school has a course on jurisprudence. So when we talk about jurisprudence, you must have done Hart and Fuller debate, right? But have you heard of Shankaracharya and Mandan Mishra debate? Have you ever heard about this? Have you ever thought in terms of the concept of justice from Indian perspective, or the concept of nyaya? We use these terms very often, but without really knowing what is the etymology or what is the understanding with which they are laden. So these are some basic questions that I have asked, and we need to really answer these questions. So the point that I'm driving you at is what we consider as Indian, what we consider as indigenous to our own Indian culture. Are we even trained in those particular aspects? Are we even do we even know about these aspects which are very crucial to our identity? And this is not the history of 200 years, as some of the scholars believe that India is a nation merely after 1947. Some of them believe that India took its shape because of the unification that the colonizers brought in. So there have been multiple theories. There have been so many people who have talked about idea of India as if India did not exist in reality. So is India merely an idea, or is there something much more to the Indian ethos, to the Indian culture, etc.? So we need to think about those aspects, and we need to probe into these ideas. So let me share with you a story and what is informing my understanding and my alternative probing into the questions of social science, and as fundamentally a student of political science. So as a PhD project, I am working on one of the very famous Maharashtrian pilgrimage, which is known as Wari, and the Varkari Sampradaya, which is the Bhakti Sampradaya in Maharashtra. And so when I was conducting my field work during 2019 July, and when I went to this pilgrimage, so one of the interviews that I was conducting was of this 82-year-old woman who came from the farming background, and she was illiterate, or maybe hardly first standard or second standard pass, or we can call her Angutha Bahadur, because she couldn't even sign the form which I gave her. So I wrote for her, and then she just put her thumb impression. So in the classical sense, she was so called illiterate. So, farming background, she was wearing this classical Maharashtrian style Nawari sari, came from the rural background. So, in all possibility, our urban, educated, English speaking mind can very well think, oh, poor old woman, poor old illiterate, and we can keep on adding those adjectives. So, this is what the urban, middle class, educated, English speaking mind thinks. So while conducting her interview, I asked her. So in this tradition, in this pilgrimage, everyone calls each other Mauli. Mauli means mother. So I called her Mauli and I asked her. So Mauli, did your family members give you permission to go on pilgrimage all by yourself? Did your husband allow you? And she gave me a very sharp and pointed response. And she said, I do not need anyone's permission. I get permission and I am being called only by Pandurang, which is the deity of this sect. So I am being called by Pandurang, and the only command that I listen to is that of Lord. Nobody else can command me. I am the commander of myself. I am the boss. Now, please understand. Let us move little back and let's try and understand what is happening. So, I gave a little picture of hers and what the urbane mind, the educated mind within me thought of her. And then this response made me think about my understanding of theories of feminism. So, what I was told and what I was taught in the university premises was that there are men and there are women. Men suppress women, and women need to retaliate. So this is the broader, and then there is a patriarchal structure. The family is an oppressive system, etc., etc. So all this has been the narrative which has been told to us by the feminist scholars, by the very classical understanding of feminism. Of course, I'm not rejecting that there are multiple feminisms today, but overall narrative remains constant that women are suppressed. And when I interviewed this woman who is very old, rural, so-called uneducated woman, and whom I considered to begin with as someone who needed my help. I needed to uplift her because that has been our classical understanding. That is what we believe, and many of our liberal friends, many of our comrade friends also believe that these are the sections who are underprivileged, who are marginalized, etc., and they need the helping hand to pull them up and to claim their rights. And this woman, whom I did not expect to say something like, I am the boss, she is telling me that I am the boss. So, the questions of agency that the feminists have talked about at length, how does this agency operate on field? How does this agency operate when we come to talk to living beings, when these are women who are living their lives even without understanding what stands for feminism or what is patriarchy, etc., etc. And that woman, she told me very categorically that she exercises her agency. Now there can be multiple layers of this, but this made me think in terms of what exactly we are taught in our schools, in our colleges, in our universities. So we are learning number of theories, whether it is about Indian nationalism, whether it is about secularism, whether it is about feminism, etc., etc. And we can have a long list, or whether it is the concept of rights, liberty, equality, justice. And where are these concepts coming from? Are these concepts rooted in Indian understanding or the kind of understanding? So the example which I gave you is merely a glimpse into this alternative approach. Because what is happening in reality, what is happening on the ground, maybe is totally different than what we are doing in our ivory towers of the university, the theories that we are learning in the universities. And then what is really happening is this gap between the university education and what is the common public understanding of the realities. So there is this huge gap, and that is what is making our intelligentsia alienate from the realities, alienate from the ground. So this is where I started asking myself questions, whether it is about feminism or, as I mentioned, about secularism or our understanding of rights, equality, liberty, the rationality centric notions of democracy. All these are questions which I then started asking, and that helped me rework my own research question, my own frameworks of understanding. So then I started thinking, what is informing me the very stereotypical understanding of women, or maybe of particular caste or class, etc., etc. What are these essentialist characteristics that are informing my understanding? And then I started realizing there are two important forces that inform our understanding. And those important forces, what are those important elements which are informing our university education and our, even for that matter, school education? So, fortunately or unfortunately, we have two kinds of hangovers. I don't know whether this would be an appropriate word, but what are these two kinds of hangovers? The first one is the colonial hangover, and we haven't really come out of those hangovers. The colonial hangover is, of course, many of us might be aware of 1835 minutes, the Macaulay minutes of meetings, wherein there was a systematic plan to create the babus or the bureaucrats who would aid the colonizers to perpetuate their dominance. So this is the colonial narrative, and that is been brought into our education system through multiple channels. Unfortunately, even after 70 years of independence, we do have that colonial hangover. And what that colonial hangover did to us, that colonial hangover redefined India and Indians. And the very purpose of that redefinition was to show and to portray, and many of the uh, academic disciplines like Indology made this effort. So there has been a series of Indologies who have been defining India, and the fundamental purpose of this definition was to portray how India was uncivilized, how barbaric it was. And we were not cultural enough, we were not cultured enough. So, both ways. So, we were ahistoric, we were not cultural, acultural, or non cultural people. And we were barbaric, we were uncivilized. So, many of the so called liberal Democrats, the great Democrats, whether it's J.S. Mill or Winston Churchill, they had predicted that democracy is not going to work in India. But India proved it wrong. So this has been the colonial hangover, wherein a particular image of India is being created and that is being perpetuated. So the very sense of anything Indian, the immediate association with that Indianness is the sense of inferiority. Whether it is the skin color, whether it is the language, whether it is the cultural ethos, whether it is religious traditions. So the immediate sense that many of us get is the sense of inferiority. Anything Indian as inferior to the Western European understanding. So that has been the colonial hangover, and this is what I term as colonial hangover. So that's one. The second hangover is the Marxist communist hangover, and especially after independence, since the then leadership was influenced by the socialist and the Marxist thought. So that Marxist communist hangover continued. So there are still people around us who eulogize about the Russian Revolution, who eulogize about the Chinese Revolution, and they still have belief that there would be some total revolution, there would be some revolution in India, and where the structures would be uprooted, wherein democracy, the bourgeois democracy, would be uprooted. All the structures of capitalism will be gone, and then there would be equality, there would be all benevolent society, etc. So this eulogization and this was informed. So if we really probe into the Marxist thought, the communist thought, what really happens is the prism through which Marxism makes sense of socio-political realities is the idea of conflict. So Marxism has a very core at its core the idea of conflict. So, as I mentioned, the first hangover was colonial hangover, which made us think of ourselves as inferior beings. And the second element, the second hangover is the communist hangover, the Marxist hangover, which made us think as if we are never ever, or we have never been a unified society. We have never been a very cohesive kind of society, because the idea is what governs our understanding of reality is the idea of conflict. So whether it is so, once we adopt the idea of conflict between haves and have-nots, and though primarily Marx talked about economic haves and have-nots, or the material well-being as the category, or the ownership of means of productions to categorize haves and have-nots, nowadays, or what we can consider as neo-Marxism, it has brought this category of conflict in almost every domain of our life. So whether it is in terms of rural urban, whether it is in terms of man and woman, whether it is class, so pick up any social category, whether it's language, gender, caste, class, all those categories, region, and then you can adopt the conflict driven understanding of our socio-political realities. And that is what is I call as communist hangover or Marxist hangover. So these two hangovers are deeply interwoven, or they are deeply rooted in our systems. One, of course, the state system, the information system, our university, and what we call as intelligentsia or academia. And basically, to put it in very simple terms, all those social influences, they are influenced by these two primary categories. And therefore, we get so there is so whenever we ask this question to anybody, as an Indian, what is our reaction to the Indianness? So there is a very sharp and strong reaction on one side, that we all are very pessimistic. So there is a very pessimistic kind of reaction which comes from especially these two kinds of hangovers, and that is a very pessimistic kind of reaction which tells us, oh, India is very poor. There is so much of caste. There is so much of oppression of women. There is so much of oppression of poor people, etc., etc., and how bad the Indian system is, etc., etc. And we can go on and on and on, adding all those negative adjectives. So this is one category. The other category, and which is equally dangerous, is all hunky dory story of Indian past. So there would be some people to just show that India has been great civilization. They would simply jump to the Vedic tradition and they would start bringing in some theories and some understanding of Vedas and how great and how ideal the Indian society was. Maybe I don't reject that as such, but frankly speaking, how do we make sense of the great Vedic tradition? How do we make sense of great social ideal realities of the Vedic times in the present day context? So that is a very crucial question, and this is where I think. So maybe in the past, maybe 5,000 years ago, maybe 3,000 years ago, India and the Indian society had been great. We need not even question, we need not even doubt that. But very primary concern is how do we make our present day society better than what we are today? At the same time, we need to be very cautious also of those who have very pessimistic approach. And here comes the alternative approach. So what is this alternative Indic approach that I have been terming as Indian or indigenous? Or to put it very simply, what do I mean by indigenous approach or Indic approach? So very fundamentally, whatever is rooted in Indian classical understanding, whatever comes from within India, and our own understanding of our own issues and our own solution to those issues can simply be termed as Indic understanding or Indic approach. Let me give you an example. We don't need to borrow the models of, say, for example, the Western liberal democracy. We don't need to borrow the concepts like human rights, because India has been the country which has never ever invaded any other country. The Indian tradition or the Indian ethos that we can talk about, or the Indic ethos that we are talking about, it has always welcomed people of different religions, of races. There are so many languages. So many people wonder how can India be united with so much of diversity? And the understanding and the answer lies here, that India has been a pluralistic country for centuries and for millennia. So we don't really need the Western categories to define ourselves. We need to come up with our own understandings, with our own understandings to define ourselves and to make sense of our own identity and what is the role that India can play in the globe today. So this is what I would define as a very broad understanding of Indic approach. So that is the foundation of Indic approach. And what are the ingredients, or what is the defining characteristic of this Indic approach? So primarily, I would say the spiritual notion, the notions of spirituality, or what has been classically considered as dharma. So this is something that is at the core of Indic approach. So if you look at the colonial narrative or the Western civilizations and Western modernity, or whether we look at the communist models of the erstwhile USSR and even today the China. So all these are absolutely materialistic understandings. So, and especially during the COVID, what we have seen very clearly is uh, many countries, the richest countries in the world or the most developed countries in the world, are suffering the worst. So, what we have constantly realized is it is not enough to have material well being, and more people are realizing, not just as society but also at individual level. It doesn't really end with achieving great prosperity materially, but it is something beyond that material prosperity that each individual keeps seeking. So what is that we seek? And the answers to these questions very well lie in our classical text in our Upanishadic text, whether it is even including Bhagavad Gita or even number of texts that have been produced even later. So we need to visit and we need to revisit, we need to make sense of our own traditions and cultures to suit our present day context. That's one. So spirituality in is first aspect. Second is our understanding of karma. So nobody else can really decide my fate. So we have this growing understanding of putting one's fate into somebody else's hand, or we give so much of power to other to rule over us that we ourselves keep losing our agency to act and to behave the way we want. So let us take this example of the present lockdown. So many of us have been working, many of us are doing our classes, assignments, etc., etc. We have been having our routine, which has been demanding otherwise, and then many of us could have been complaining about that routine. And now that there is lockdown and we have all possible time and all possibilities of pursuing what we have always thought of pursuing, even then we are complaining. So then the question is, what is going to make me free from these clutches of um, imagination, from these clutches of externalities, stopping me from enjoying my freedom? So maybe the answer again lies in our classic text, wherein, or even more than text, I would say the practices which are been continuing till date. So maybe it is meditation, maybe it is the Guru Parampara that we have been witnessing. So maybe again that is something which will be ingrained in the idea of spirituality itself. So the idea of karma, that I am going to make my own fate and I take charge of my life, the best possible thing I can do is within my capability, and then I do not really expect others to behave the way I want. And I think that would serve the fundamental understanding of tolerance. So all this discussion, all this debate about whether India is tolerant or intolerant, so I believe we don't really need the Western paradigms of understanding how much tolerant India is. So of course, this is not something which is hunky dory story that I'm telling you. It is not something that I really want to whitewash all the social evils or all the hierarchies or all the discrimination in our society. But at the same time, what we know for sure, that whether it is the colonial Western modern understanding of solving the social issues, or whether it is the communist model, or whether it is the Marxist model, either ways it doesn't serve the purpose. So we need our own solutions to our own problems. I'm not saying, so whether it is caste issue, whether it is gender issue, there have been substantial issues and there have been substantial problems, but the solutions do not lie in the external models which we need to adopt as it is to suit our Indian understandings. We need to adopt our own models, we need to adopt our own classical understandings to suit our present day context. So basically, this is what my submission is. Then the question arises, okay, fine, this is all about Indic idea or Indic understanding. Okay, let me also add one more point to what constitutes Indic approach. One I mentioned about karma, the other approach was spirituality or dharma. And the third important element, unlike the Western notion of individual or the Western notion of self, which itself is exclusionary, in Indian tradition or in Indic ethos, more inward we become. Please pay attention to this. More inward we become, more accommodative we become of others. Because that has been the idea of self, that has been the concept of Brahman. So if we become much more self centric or self oriented, inward oriented, more is a possibility of understanding that I and the other are not different, and therefore we become more and more accommodative of others. So, this idea of self versus other, or the binary construction of self versus other in whatever social or political or economic categories we want to, that would fall flat if we start adopting the Indian understanding of self. So this is another approach. So I would like to quote our External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar. In one of his interviews, he had said, in 2019 in US, when he gave interview to one of the think tanks, he had said that more national India becomes, more international its outlook is. So this seems very paradoxical if we adopt a very Eurocentric or Western category, or even the Marxist category of understanding. So if we adopt these categories, nationalism and internationalism may seem binary opposites. The self and the other do seem binary opposites. But if we adopt the Indian understanding, then definitely we can have the solution of the so-called binaries coexisting, and that has been the Indian tradition. So India looks like a beautiful amalgamation or beautiful bouquet of multiple cultures, multiple diversities, but there still runs inherent common thread. There is still runs a common civilizational ethos, and I think that celebration of diversity, that's where the idea of Indic approach lies. Let me just conclude this session by saying, so how do we adopt this Indic approach in our day-to-day lives, or even when we are doing our academic activities, etc.? So, very simple understanding is, let's take a pause, let's unlearn whatever influences we have, and then let's start asking questions in terms of, okay, would this suit our own understanding and our own narrative and the problems that we have in India, or the issues that we face in India, or say whether it is the environmental sciences, or whether it is the question of ecologism, feminism, secularism, whether it is political theory, whether it is law, whether it is management or medicine. So this holistic approach, one more important point that we have in Indic approaches is the holistic approach. We don't really look into the particulars. Of course, we need to go deeper into the particular, no doubt about that. But that particular needs to make sense in the context of whole. We can't take the isolated parts and start saying that, okay, this is what this particular phenomena is, and therefore we start generalizing based on that particularity and impose those generalizations on the other. Rather, what we need to see is, we need to see the continuity, and we need to see the carry forward of multiple traditions, carry forward of multiple cultures. So I think this can sum up my today's talk on need for an alternative Indic approaches. I would be very glad to answer any questions or queries if you have any of them, within my limited knowledge and the limited corpus of my understanding. Thank you so much for being live. Okay, so Sanjay is saying yes, he knows about darshans a little bit, and he is also familiar with Sanskrit. And then Dhara Gandhisha. So I so this person is asking me, do you mean to say that we should look at the gray area rather than black and white? In other words, Anekantavada or over Shunyavad. Yes, in fact, if some of my students are live at the moment, they can really say that these are the terms that I often use in the class. There are no blacks and whites. So let's take example of gender and how do we make sense of gender. So in Indian classical understanding, we never have really thought of binary oppositions between man and woman. In fact, in India, the gender understanding has always been fluid, and we talk about the degrees of masculinity and femininity rather than the man and the woman. So that is not our understanding at all. And I think what you are pointing out is absolutely correct. We need to look at the areas of gray, and once we start doing that, automatically what we realize, the differences are merely of degree and not of kind. And once that realization happens, then we can say, oh, fantastic, we can all exist because we are standing on different scale, but essentially it is the same scale. So that's, I think, serves the purpose. So let's see what is the next comment. Although we can relate Lakshagraha incident of Mahabharat and Panchavati in Ramayana, any solid reference of lockdown type situation in our scripture, we love to know. I'm not sure about this because, frankly speaking, I haven't come across any such incidents. In fact, if those who are live at the moment and if you have any suggestions to this question, please share them with all. So I think this is it. I can see these many comments. So if you still have some questions, I would be very happy to take them. Okay, so Shivaya Ashutosh is saying it was knowledgeable lecture. Thank you so much. This is what comes from little experience and little research that I'm doing. I would be very happy and glad to share more insights, and I would also like to learn if you have anything to share. So, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I wish you all very happy social distancing, though I think these are uh, contradictory words, but still we need to keep safe. So, stay home, stay safe, stay healthy. Bye, everyone.